So, 4 years after the reboot of Star Trek into what is now known as the Kelvin universe, we got Star Trek Into Darkness in 2013. Now, a lot of comparisons are made between this movie as well as the Wrath of Khan, where people tend to say that Into Darkness essentially is a remake of the Wrath of Khan, and those people are kind of right to a specific point, but it's actually more so of a remake of Space Seed. So yeah, let's get into why I think that it is literally a remake of the season 1 episode of the original series Space Seed. So, Into Darkness. First of all, I genuinely do like this movie. It was the second Star Trek movie that I ever seen in cinema, and I've only seen three. The first one was Star Trek Nemesis, which I already covered early on this month. Then this one, and then the next one, which I'll be covering in just a day or two time, is Star Trek Beyond. So this one, out of the Kelvin trilogy, is one I've seen more than Beyond because I've only ever seen Star Trek Beyond once, and that was in cinema. But it's not one that I return to as frequently. Don't get me wrong, as I said, I still enjoy the movie, but it's one that I return to less and less compared to, say, Star Trek '09 or Star Trek First Contact. Anyway, back to why I think this is essentially a Space Seed remake, and that is because the way it sets it up is literally almost one to one what Space Seed was, but essentially as a what if theory. You know, like how in season 1, episode 10 of Strange New Worlds, we have that what if theory of what if it was Pike who was dealing with the Romulans in the episode Balance of Terror. And that's what this is, because basically a couple of months after the events of the first movie, Admiral Marcus, who is head of Section 31, accidentally stumbles upon the SS Botany Bay further out into space because they are going further out into space than they had but in the prime timeline, because again everything in the prime timeline versus Kelvin timeline are two completely separate entities. The Enterprise was built and constructed in 2250s, where it actually launched in 2240s. So it's not as a relatively old ship as we know it to be. Um, and yeah, we're just actually shy. This movie takes place in 2259, so we're just shy of when the original series is actually supposed to take place in 2263. Anyway, I'm getting distracted again. So Admiral Marcus, who's one of the heads of Section 31, revives Khan only because, as RoboCop himself has played in the Star Trek Enterprise episode Terra Firma, he's very xenophobic, to the extent where he knows, or at least he knows, that a war between the Federation and the Klingons are inevitable, and so in order to be one up them and go towards a more militaristic Starfleet, he wakes up Khan, who, when he does wake him up, is of American Indian descent, but it's mentioned in the Star Trek Con comics published by IDW, which, if you want to consider those canon or non-canon, that's up to you. But this is either an alpha or beta canon explanation that you decide whether or not which one it falls under. That because Khan would have been so well known because the facial features and all that, in this timeline, because of Admiral Marcus got to him, he goes under facial reconstructive surgery to look like Benedict Cumberbatch, essentially. So that is the either alpha or beta canon explanation of why he doesn't look like Ricardo Montalban, who again is the superior Khan, but also Benedict Cumberbatch does a pretty good job. Anyway, so he then recruits Khan to work for Section 31 to develop weapons and better shields and all that stuff for this supposed war against the Klingons. And So now we're in present day. We start with the movie on the planet Nibiru, where the planet's inhabitants are about to be wiped out because of a volcano. And basically, the crew of the Enterprise prevent that from happening. In the process, breaking the Prime Directive for because Kirk decides to save Spock, who was about to die. And this is where it brings the main character journeys for both Kirk and Spock in this movie. And it's the one thing that I was thinking about pretty early on. They both go on separate journeys that end up intertwining towards the end of the movie. So for Kirk, not only is it essentially about revenge, which we're going to touch on now in a second, it's taking his ego down a peg or two. Because since taking over command of the Enterprise, he is essentially being like a hotshot captain, throwing out the rules, falsifying reports, you know, doing all these things you should not do. And because he broke the Prime Directive and saved Spock from that destruction, he omits that um, from his report. Where Spock, thinking Kirk would do that, follow orders, basically says so in his report, which then gets Kirk and Spock reprimanded. So Kirk, as I said, Kirk's journey is getting his ego taken down because in the argument he has with Captain Pike, or sorry, I should say Admiral Pike, um, he basically says, ever since I took over this ship, I have not lost a single crewman on board my ship. Um, and by the end of the movie, he faces loss of his crew. He loses a hell of a lot of his crewmates. The people who serve under him because of the decisions that he made in basically thinking purely on revenge for on Khan. Again, I'll get to that now in a second. Whereas, so now Spock's character arc is learning the true, basically just the true meaning of the friendship he has with um with Kirk and why Kirk went out of his way to break the Prime Directive in order to save him, because the Prime Directive would have had Spock die on that planet. And so by the end of the movie, he now realizes his mistake, even though it technically isn't a mistake. That's what he should have done in the first place, but still, betraying the friendship is the main thing. And as I said, they both intertwine at the end of the movie. So Kirk then loses the Enterprise, and it is given to back to Pike, and he then argues for Kirk to be his first officer. So basically, Kirk takes a gets demoted from captain to lieutenant commander. Um, so as all this is happening, um, Khan goes to Mickey Smith, the actor, well, Nicole Clark, who plays Mickey Smith, appears in this movie, who works for Section 31 in the London division, helps his ailing daughter, and in order for him to blow up the archives of Section 31 so that he can then take stuff that he needs. And then he goes, because of that, because of the attack, that then requires the Admiralty, or in this case, just Admiral Marcus, to get all of the captains and first officers in a room to discuss this. And that's what Kirk immediately figures out, but he's a second too late because Khan shows up and wastes the entire room, where only a few people survive, being Kirk, Spock, because, plot armor, and Admiral Marcus, again, plot armor. And unfortunately, Captain Pike does not make it. So it doesn't matter what timeline he's in, Pike always gets the short end of the stick. The only timeline that we don't know what happened to him, in which we can assume Kirk killed him, is in the Mirror Universe, where I think Kirk, being first officer Kirk, killed uh, Terran Pike in order to take command of the Enterprise. That's just my little headcanon that I just came up with briefly there. Anywhoosies, so Kirk then gets back control of the Enterprise. He asks for Spock to be his number one again, and they decide to go to Kronos after figuring out that's where Khan is. And they also get given 71 or 72 new specialized torpedoes that once fired on this isolated place where no other life on Kronos is except for Khan. Um, that they can fire it, kill him, and leave. And so they go to the edge of Federation space and they are immediately kicked out of warp because there's some trickery going on in engineering. Because Scotty isn't on board anymore because he had a bit of a tiff with Kirk, who is essentially filled on rage and revenge, as I mentioned. He's basically beeline on revenge. Kill the bastard who killed his father figure. Um, and so they, instead of, firing these torpedoes, himself, Uhura, and Spock take one of Mudd's ships, the ship that they encountered Mudd on. So at least we know that Harkin Fenton Mudd is also, is still pretty much probably in a Federation penal colony. Um, Potentially, I don't know. It's never really mentioned. It's just a throwaway line for those uh, OG Star Trek fans who know of the episodes Mudd's Women, and I Mudd. Um, but anyway, they go down to Kronos. They are stopped by Klingons in D4 Bird of Prey, which looks pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie, I love the Kelvin D4 Bird of Prey designs. And then we also get to see the Kelvin uh, Klingon designs because they technically were in the first one, but it was deleted scenes because they decided to cut that out, those scenes out. So we could have seen it as early as 2009, but hey, at least we got to see them, and they look pretty amazing. I do love these Klingon designs. It's a shame they couldn't use those Klingon designs for Discovery season one, but that's either here nor there. So basically, Khan takes out all the Klingons, surrenders himself, tells Kirk about Admiral Marcus's secret weapon, gets Scotty to go there, and turns out it's a ship known as the USS Vengeance, which has the configuration essentially of a Constitution class, but more beefed up. But it's not a Constitution class, it is known as a Dreadnought class. And boy howdy, does she pack a wallop, because she was built to the point where you only need a minimal crew to do it. So when they learn of what Admiral Marcus has planned, and with the so they leave. They decide to run back to Earth because Kirk decides instead of killing Khan, he's going to make him stand tribunal for what he done. And whilst in that warp field, not too far away from Earth, yeah, the Vengeance is faster. I mean, the Enterprise is fast, with the more advanced warp engines compared to what they should have by 2259, as I said in the Star Trek '09 movie review. Um, yeah, the Dreadnought's faster, and as I said, it packs a wallop and fires on the Enterprise, and it done so much damage that it knocked it out the warp bubble, just shy of Earth, and they get into a bit of a battle. Now, the one thing that confuses me the most about this, and I think they're, thinking about it now, there is a explanation for it. They're pretty close to Earth. Where's Starbase One? Where's Space Dock? Why aren't they seeing any of this? Why aren't they investigating any of that? And I think the explanation, thinking about it logically now, I think the explanation about that is because of Admiral Marcus. I think he told him twisted lies about what Kirk and his crew done, So anyway, Carol Marcus talks to her dad, who RoboCop then beams her aboard. Um, I think with the shields still up. I'm not 100% sure if the shields are down at this point. Um, but then they go to prepare to destroy the Enterprise. But Scotty is on board thanks to the coordinates that Khan gave Kirk, who gave to Scotty. And so Kirk and Khan end up on board the USS Vengeance. They make their way to the bridge, and Khan kills Admiral Marcus after breaking Carol's leg, and he gets his crew back onto the Vengeance. But it turns out Spock was a sneaky little bastard and took out his Khan's crew from the cryo sleep, still in the cryo chambers, but detonated the warhead. So, not long after they were beamed onto the Vengeance, it goes kaboom, and they both end up falling towards Earth. Now this is where it starts to feel like Wrath of Khan. And why I say that is because it's literally nearly 1 to 1, just reversed. So, as you know, Wrath of Khan, it's Spock who sacrifices himself to save the Enterprise from being destroyed. But in this movie, it's actually Kirk who sacrifices himself in order to save the Enterprise and what's left of his crew from plummeting to Earth. And by doing so, that kills him. And then, of course, Spock yells Khan, and he beams down, fights him. Turns out they can use Khan's blood to save Kirk. They put Kirk into cryogenic sleep to preserve the brainwaves. They capture Khan and end the movie, essentially. So yeah, it feels to me more as I was watching it, and the more I thought about it, the more it felt like Space Seed, a remake of Space Seed. Because as you know, in the episode, the Enterprise comes across the Botany Bay. They reanimate Khan, and only Khan for the moment. He learns, acclimates to the place, falls in love with one of the crew members, who's a historian, and then goes revives his crew, takes over the Enterprise, and yeah. So to me, like I said, this just feels like a remake of Spacey because of how things happen in the movie. You know, Khan is reawakened, this time by Admiral Marcus, but this time he goes to work for Section 31 instead of trying to take over the ship. He goes through some genetic surgery to look not like Khan, and then when he wants his crew to be revived, that isn't happening. He gets threatened. He runs and goes on a vengeance, which then leads into, the Wrath of Khan similarities. So yeah, that has been my review of Star Trek Into Darkness. Let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments down below. And yeah, the next review is actually going to be of the last Star Trek movie. We are at the end of the Star Trek reviews. It has taken me 3 months to do it, but we're at the end. So I will see you all on the next upload, which will be of my Star Trek Beyond review, which will be a second time watch for me. And then after I've reviewed that, I will of course rank all 13 Star Trek movies. So look forward to that one. And I'll see you on that upload.